Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the second video in this History's Voices series. And as we said in the first video, this series is in direct relation to our summer reading program here at the French Valley Library. And in this series, we're going to be looking at the different voices in French Valley history that have made a difference both in their time and in ours. Now, as said in the first video, the archive we have here is not necessarily set up to do biographies. So that being said, we are going to take a certain person from history and take snapshots of their lives, see what they went through, what influenced them, and what ultimately brought them here to French Valley and how they made a difference. So, without further ado, let's go ahead and move on to our second person in the History's Voices series, Mr. Jean-Pierre Pourroy. Jean Pourroy, known as Pierre by his family and friends, was born in Alsace, France in 1862. Pierre serves as a true example of the American dream manifest in an immigrant coming from a war-torn nation. He and his family would face nationalist discrimination on their journey west through the war-torn American East, eventually settling here in French Valley to create a sprawling and successful ranch and farm. At the time of their arrival in the valley, the area was largely up for sale as Mexican land grants were falling vacant every year. It was through one of these land grants that the Pourroys were able to purchase a large swath of land to build their farm and ranch, part of which was once the land the library sits on today. It was through the efforts of pioneers and immigrants such as Pierre that French Valley grew distinctive from the neighboring Temecula, Marietta, and Vale domain. Now, to understand why the Pourroys came here, we need to examine the Franco-Prussian War. As with many of the French settlers who came to French Valley in the 1800s, the Pourroy family came because of war. In 1870, an alliance between the unified German states, in conflict with the Emperor of France, Napoleon III, would bring about one of the deadliest wars to impact Europe up to that point. With almost all major powers organized and weaponized against one another, the war was waged on a scale not seen since the times of the Napoleonic Wars almost 100 years earlier. What made this conflict distinctly different, however, was its use of more modern weaponry, such as needle rifles, high explosive munitions, and chemical warfare. These advancements made war go from a pastime, and yes, people would actually sit and spectate at major military confrontations in the Napoleonic War, to what would eventually become known as total war. With these new weapons being brought to bear on military personnel and civilians alike, the Franco-Prussian War caused more death and destruction than ever witnessed before in human history. It became a haunting premonition of the wars that would erupt in just a few years' time, and also served as a grounding point for understanding the so-called powder keg Europe, which was important in understanding what exactly caused the First World War. As it relates to our French settlers, the war completely destroyed the region of Alsace, France, their home. Likewise, a revolution in 1871 threw the rest of France into bitter turmoil. These refugees had to find a place to go, somewhere they could reestablish themselves from relatively nothing into a bustling support for a family and friends. Spurred from England for long-held hostilities and wary of other European powers and their ideology, the French turned to the United States as their land of opportunity. The country they came to, unfortunately, much resembled the war-torn countryside that they were fleeing from. America in the 1870s was a country still reeling from the effects of a devastating civil war that had ended just years prior. The national mood was one of belligerence, both toward each other, but especially to foreigners. Much like the Irish, the French refugees were looked down upon as well for both a difference in cultural norms and a difference in language. For the Pourroy family, braving these attacks and sometimes killings was difficult to do. However, as they moved further west to the open lands of the American frontier, their situation improved, but their physical situation worsened. The terrain was harsh and rugged, claiming many lives. Only the toughest survived, but those who did put all their effort and grit into the progress and their success on the road ahead of them. For the Pourroy family, their toils led to success for their families and cohorts in the form of fertile land in the Southern California Valley. The Pourroy family would take over existing land grants from the Mexican government and turn relatively unsettled land into a profitable ranch. Pierre would make meaningful friendships with many of French Valley's most influential citizens, among them Marius Nicolas, Alexander Burrell, William Auld, Tommy Rawson, and many others. Together, these pioneers would put French Valley on the map, inventing themselves as resourceful dry farmers and ranchers. For immigrants like Pourroy, farming in Southern California had both its differences and similarities to farming in the northeast of France. Many of the same crop could be planted relatively easily, and an abundance of sunshine meant that crop yields were often high. However, California is much hotter and far more arid than what they were used to. Water became both a source of joy and contention very quickly in the valley. One thing the Pourroys, among the others, profited on in the valley was ranching. Usually, if the ground was too steep, dry, or unseemly for crop, it could be used for grazing. As the weather turned warmer, many of French Valley's farmers doubled into ranching and switched over to ranching completely. Pierre would pass away on March 30th, 1952, at age 90. He would be laid to rest close to the land that he held so dear to his heart and close to where his family lives on in this valley today. That was it for our second video in the History's Voices series. As I said in the first video, if you believe that you have an artifact or know some story from French Valley history, please let me know at frenchvalleyarchive@gmail.com. Please stay tuned for our third and final video in the series, and thank you very much for joining us today.